Hello, I'm Naomi Klein, and I am so happy to join the Earth Day 2024 virtual stage. I'm here to talk with Minister Susana Muhamad, Colombia's Minister for the Environment, and we're going to be talking about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Welcome, Minister, and I'm just going to start with a basic question. What is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Thank you, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be here and sharing with all of you this Earth Day. Well, it is a proposal that already 13 countries are putting forward so that we can negotiate a legally binding mechanism so that we can phase out fossil fuels in a just manner. Right now, the Convention on Climate Change is a convention that, although is in our legal frameworks in our countries, it is not really mandatory. The NDCs is just a way, or the plans that we make for phasing out fossil fuels and reducing emissions is just every country doing whatever they have or they can with what they have. And what we're looking for is actually understanding that phasing out fossil fuels is not an easy task from the economic perspective and neither from the consumer's perspective, and that it requires a global effort, and that we require to plan this transition so that we can foresee together all the difficulties that this will bring, and we can take political measures globally so that nobody really is left behind in this transition, and we can be effective in actually complying with the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Well, thank you for that. I remember when Colombia signed on to the treaty, there was a huge amount of excitement because you are a large country and you have a lot of those fossil fuels and resources. So this is not kind of an academic discussion for you. And I'm embarrassed to say I'm speaking to you from Canada, and we're nowhere near that level of commitment. So why did Colombia make this? Why is this treaty so important to you as a nation?
Look, honestly, we understand that our countries will be the ones that are most affected by climate change, especially the countries that are in the tropical area of the world. And the vulnerabilities that this is creating requires that we really take action. And the only thing we see is that the emissions continue to grow, even though we have these large commitments made by governments within the Paris Agreement and the Climate Convention. But if we talk from a perspective, economic perspective in Colombia, what you will find is that a country like Colombia is in the worst of the situations in this transition. First, because we depend highly for our fiscal income on the export of coal and the export of oil. We are the 5th largest exporter of coal in the world. And then at the same time, for us, it's not only the energy transition, but it's the economic transition. What will happen as the world decarbonizes and our markets start to close and we haven't developed other economic sectors that will help us to not depend so much for fiscal income and for the balance of trade on the export of oil and coal. We are not Saudi Arabia that can have unlimited almost reserves. But at the same time, we are a middle country, and we don't see that the economic situation of the world offers a perspective for this transition. And I would want to explain it in a very explicit way. Like, for example, right now, we faced 3 years of Niña that left in Colombia 1 million victims of climate change. This year, we are facing the Niño, which left also lost and damages because of the wildfires. And we're going to face Niña again. And the fiscal space that we have is not enough to deal at the same time with the climate consequences of climate change in our territory, the social responsibilities that the government has, and at the same time, what the world offers us for this transition, that for us will include stopping to export oil and coal, which we depend on for our fiscal income, is debt. And this debt is actually creating that we get more and more indebted, and now a big percentage, almost 25% of our budget we have to pay every year in debt, is twice the amount we pay for education. So how is it real that we can say that we will comply our NDC, that we will comply phasing out fossil fuels. We think that the fossil fuel treaty should be a mechanism to really put into perspective the situation that we are in the world, and through politics, not through rhetoric, create a binding mechanism that helps us to have a plan where we all collaborate and take into account different situations of countries in this transition, so that we make it real and we stop putting the elephant that is on the room, which is how do we do this economic transition when we talk about phasing out fossil fuels, reducing emissions, and making the climate commitments that we have made in the conventions.
Well, those are a lot of dots you've connected. I'm going to add another one, which is as the climate crisis accelerates, we're also seeing an acceleration of far-right authoritarian politics, openly fascistic politics, really around the world, certainly in Latin America, which I think is one of the reasons why the leadership in Colombia is so important. And the Fossil Fuel Nonproliferation Treaty, of course, is modeled on the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It comes out of the movement against militarism and weapons of mass destruction. I want to talk about Gaza, because I do think this is all connected. And this is another area where we have seen extraordinary leadership from your government, including from President Pietro saying months ago that he felt like in Gaza, the global South was seeing a glimpse of a kind of future if we stay on this path. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how what we're talking about today, which is the right to a future where everyone thrives, is connected to this genocidal violence in Gaza.
The issue and how President Petro has explained, and I think is for him a way of seeing the attitude that powerful countries had on Palestine could be the same attitude that we could face with the climate crisis. We have seen just in Colombia, in the border between Colombia and Panama, the increase of migration through the Darien forest. And what we will see when you see the climate change scenarios is that many countries in South America will start having a big crisis on water, and this will cause forced migration. And as time goes by and we don't deal with the climate crisis, our capacity to govern our own countries, because we are stretched in this governance crisis after crisis, will end up having these massive migrations of people from the place they feel less secure or they cannot sustain their livelihood to places where they think they can sustain, and probably that will be to the north. And what will happen when these mass migrations start happening? What will be the response of the north? And that's where President Petro says, because we don't have a multilateral governance and we are not putting politics as a way to solve a crisis that is unprecedented, what will receive these migrants will be genocide, wars, and armies. And what is scary is that the attitude that countries like the United States, that some countries of the European Union have towards the Palestinians in Gaza, show also how in a certain point, people from the South will be looked at from these more powerful countries that have more capacity to adapt. And if for them, the life of these children, the life of these families do not matter, that in the perspective of sustaining their security and their enclaves, their political enclaves in Middle East, they are able to bear genocide. This could at the same time happen with the climate massive migrations, and a perspective where technology, so countries that can invest in technology to make these technological bubbles to protect themselves from the climate crisis will be in a stand, and the countries that do not have this capacity then could be subject to violence in total impunity. And this is what is very scary, and that's why we're calling back multilateral politics to stand up to create the mechanisms that are not the ones we have today, that's clearly, and to discuss the power issues through politics in real terms. But it's scary that human rights, the conventions, didn't matter in Palestine and could not matter at the same time in the climate crisis.
I really agree with you that this normalization of mass death is interconnected with the failure to act in the face of the climate crisis. And of course, if we don't have robust international humanitarian laws, we're not going to be able to respond to any of these crises. I think people watching will probably want to know what they can do. So let's end with some advice about what people and governments can do to move things in the right direction and support your visionary leadership in Colombia.
I think that people's movement and people's capacity to mobilize and to take care of the climate crisis also in their local areas. This means don't be indifferent to the situation. Don't think that because you are well today, it will be the same tomorrow. We need to activate, to mobilize, to have understanding, to get information, and to organize ourselves, self-organize. President Petro and our government believes a lot in the power of people and mobilization. We really put our hopes there. That is able to mobilize power, to mobilize governments, to mobilize companies into a different future. We don't need necessarily to live this catastrophe that we could live, and there is still some time. And so let's put our boots on and mobilize and move.
Well, thank you so much. I hope people got all of these messages, that really what connects this is a protection of life, a valuing of life, and a valuing of what we have of international law, which has been so hard won, and then we need to expand it. So I want to thank the team at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, because that's an incredible tool that we have and that we need to strengthen. Thanks, everyone. Happy Earth Day.
Thank you.